if you are building a brand or you are creating a brand, it's like creating a human being which has a soul and a body and, to your point, an emotional connect that you need to build.
Welcome to Beyond Borders New York Edition, a Multiplier talk series that brings together global first thought leaders and entrepreneurs to discuss the future of work. In this episode, we dive into how to build an authentic global brand, from scaling brand purpose to localizing messaging.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Beyond Borders. We are in a beautiful city of New York. I'm Monish Munshi. I am the CMO of Multiplier. We are talking to another beautiful person today. Sarah, can you just give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Reynolds. I'm an HR tech analyst at Lighthouse Research, and I'm also a recovering chief marketing officer. So you and I have done the same job many times, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about global brand.
Awesome. So why a recovering chief marketing officer?
Well, right now I'm not a chief marketing officer, but I still think that marketing is one of my first loves. And, working in HR and working in HR tech, I think there's a lot of synergies between like what HR folks go through and what marketing folks go through and think about every day.
No, I thought that it was someone has to go through rehabilitation once they're chief marketing.
Certainly.
But Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you here with me. I have been seeing your work of late, and I love the brands that you have created.
Thank you.
And I was just very interested to know your perspective on what does a brand mean to you? What is a brand?
I think a brand is like a feeling. It's something that is intangible, but it sort of governs how you think about or how you relate to a company or the brand itself, right? It's something that you can't necessarily put words on, but it helps you understand if I relate emotionally to a company or a product or a service. People think about like Android and Apple, and you might gravitate towards one or the other, even if the feature sets are very similar in the phones that you're looking at. And part of that has to do with whether you identify more as one brand or another, or think about, maybe you want to go buy a really fancy sports car. Are you more of a Jaguar person? Are you more of a Ferrari person? That sort of like intangible connection you have to a brand tends to draw your eye to one or the other. And it tends to make you think like, wow, that's a company that I want to be associated with. That's a company that stands for the things that I believe in. That's a company whose products I'm really proud to support or represent. So I think for me, it's really that like emotional connection that the brand helps you build with something that otherwise, why are you emotionally connected to your car? Why are you emotionally connected to your phone? You might not feel that without sort of like that brand weight behind it.
Yeah, very interesting take. And when I was seeing this one snippet on LinkedIn where people are talking about B2B brand, and it was a Pulp Fiction take on that, and they're talking about, hey, in B2B, it's like they don't call it brand, they call it demand generation. But that was a funny take on it. But how I see also that if you are building a brand or you are creating a brand, it's like creating a human being which has a soul and a body and to your point, an emotional connect that you need to build. And if you don't have the soul to the brand or soul to this thing that you are creating, you will never be able to make the connect, that emotional connect that you are creating. So
yeah, totally.
Very interesting take on that. But when you are talking about a global brand, which is not localized, it's not necessarily only resonating with one set of people, it's just recognized globally. How do you see that very differently from a brand which is just connecting to a small niche of people, small regional people, and what are the most important ingredients of that brand when you're creating a global brand?
Yeah. So I think brand is about connection, right? And it's easier to connect to people who are very similar. right? So if you're building a brand for a very small niche audience, it can be really easy to tap into what do those people care about? What do they believe in? How do they think? How do they act? Maybe even what colors do they like? But when you're building a brand for a global, diverse audience, you have to think about so many different people around the world. You have to think about, in B2B, you have to think about so many different types of companies. You have to think about so many different buying personas in the world, right? You have to cater to the HR department, to the finance department, to the founder, to the CEO, right? It's really difficult sometimes to build a brand that is something for everyone. And I think that's why some of the strongest brands, they get really crisp on like, who are they for and what do they stand for and who are they not for, or what do they maybe not represent or not want to put forward in the market. And I think when you sort of expand that idea globally, you have to get really, really crisp about that tone or about that soul, right? And you have to figure out, okay, I am for this specific group of people, but that group of people maybe doesn't look the same, believe the same things, understand their relationship to work the same way across the world. And so when I take my local brand global, now I have to figure out essentially how to translate or localize my brand, my soul for that audience across the entire globe.
That's a very interesting nuance that you bring in. And to carry forward the same point, when you're building this global brand, these nuances around localization of that, especially when you are building it globally, this diversity of thought and diversity of that entire soul of the elements of the soul that you're building requires diversity in the team itself that
Yes.
you're building. So when you're building a team which is going to create a global brand, do you think that diversity is going to be one of the most important elements that you have to bring in? Not only diversity in people who are from different regions, diversity of thought, diversity in multiple cases, diversity in race, diversity in gender. How big diversity plays a part in creating a global brand?
I think it's fundamental, right? If you're trying to connect with people who come from different backgrounds, who better to advise you on how to make that authentic and successful than people who come from different backgrounds? And to your point, that could be different lived experiences. It could be different professional experiences. It could be, people from different parts of the world. If you're trying to take a brand that's really successful in, maybe the US or in New York, right? And maybe your brand is built on this soul of like hustle culture, and you're trying to translate that for maybe the Nordics, where they take all of August off for vacation. You can't necessarily one-to-one take New York hustle culture, drop it into, Sweden or Norway and say like it's going to resonate exactly the same way. You have to find a way to communicate that soul of your brand and maybe what you stand for, that you use in the US is like that shorthand is hustle culture. But you have to sort of figure out, like distill it a bit down and figure out what are the fundamental elements of that. And then maybe you're going to partner with employees in Sweden or Norway or other parts of the Nordics or in other regions where they don't have that same relationship to work, but they can help you understand, okay, if my soul is hard work, if my soul is, being able to provide for my family, if my soul is like fast paced, how do I translate that in a way that's going to feel really authentic to a local audience and isn't just going to feel like I took this sort of like artifact from New York and tried to make it true in another place?
Yeah.
I think, you can think about that in terms of geography, and you can also think about that in terms of like your lived experience or your professional experience.
Yeah.
If you're trying to market to marketers, you probably look and sound different than if you're trying to market to manufacturers, or if you're trying to market to HR people, or if you're trying to market to, really any other group of folks around the world, because the language that we use is different. I mean, you just talked about like a meme on LinkedIn, right? But my friends who work in manufacturing, they don't scroll LinkedIn all day. I know friends who don't even have a LinkedIn account. If you started talking to them, in meme language or about the latest post you saw on LinkedIn, they would have no idea what you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you have to talk to them in the language that, they they really connect with and that represents, the business that they deal with all day. I think that's where that great power of diversity comes to life, because everybody has a different story and they can bring that story, that perspective to your marketing efforts and say, hey, that's hilarious in, US English, but it's maybe offensive someplace else. Or, hey, that's really great. It really connects with an audience of marketers, but it's not going to work for manufacturers, whatever your sort of like translation element is.
Absolutely. And one thing that is very interesting for me, that even if you are not creating a global brand, even if you are creating a brand which is very localized, diversity just brings in a lot of nuances that you would miss if you don't have diversity. So if you're creating a value proposition for your product, and that product is also limited to one region, diversity just brings in the life experiences that that person has, in order to provide elements of and look your product, your services in a very different way, and provide that perspective, which builds a very nuanced and very, as you said, very emotional, high on EQ communication, or high on EQ design that people resonate with. And I have always felt that. I've always felt that if you have more diverse teams, your creativity goes up by a notch, but just not up by a notch, not up by a fraction, but significantly. So that's why I feel that even if you are not building a global brand, even a local brand, and you have a diverse team, your output is going to be very layered, very nuanced, and very much creatively much more better than if you have a non-diverse team.
Yeah, I think creativity, I think innovation, if you bring together experts with all these different experiences, you're going to get so many more solutions to the same problem, and ultimately maybe more innovative solutions to the same problem. I also think it creates that feeling of trust. If brand is about emotional connection and it's about soul, right? You want to create a brand that your customers trust. And part of that trust is being authentic, right? Being authentic to their lived experience, being authentic in the language you use to communicate with them, being authentic in, how you connect with them, or the localization, connecting with their market, right? Making sure it's relevant, maybe with their industry, whatever it is. I think that all of that really helps build that soul of the brand that you can really rely on, and then you can do great things with it, to your point about being more creative and innovative.
Yeah. Absolutely. This takes us to a very fundamental thing. Since the time I have joined Multiplier, I was in SaaS for a long time doing marketing. But when I joined Multiplier, I just entered a space where I saw organizations just going after the market that is available to them, instead of creating a very compelling brand. And when I see some of the brands that I really love in the market, one of them is the organization that you used to work for, and the very compelling brand that you created there. And when I joined the space where we are in right now, one of the things that I realized was the focus has been to capture the market, which is already there, and then open up new markets by building products that cater to that market. Instead of creating a very compelling brand through which you really educate the people and expand that brand, expand that category through your brand, and then capture the market through that category expansion that you're doing. That is one thing that I see missing in most of the organizations that I see in this space. And that is one area that I feel is where brand takes precedence, where a brand is going to propel the organization forward, instead of an organization propelling the brand as to what your work should be there in the market. What is your thought on around HR tech, around the space that we are in, and how people are going out there, and that instead of focusing on creating a very compelling brand that expands the category, just captures the demand that is already there in that category?
Yeah, I think HR tech is such an interesting market. I mean, I've worked in HR tech almost my whole career. I'm a huge dork for the HR tech market. Anybody who knows me probably knows that. But it's a market that's really competitive, and it's a market that is full of what an old head of corporate strategy of mine would have called like substitute goods, which means that there's no one way to build your HR tech stack. And that means that there's a lot of market opportunity for many different players. So you can be a best of breed point solution, you can be a full suite solution, you could be somewhere in the middle. But to your point, because it's so competitive, I think we tend to have a very myopic view of our world. Instead of thinking about, okay, how do we educate people about, what they need in an HR solution or what they need in an EOR solution or what they need in an ATS, we think mostly about how do I compete with the person down the street? And that leads to maybe some, not trust building behavior in the market. I don't necessarily think that the best way of going about building a market or building a brand is things like corporate espionage. But, I think that it's an incredible opportunity for folks to really rise above the conversation or rise above that view of the market as just, 1 to 3 competitors that you're always chasing or you're always, looking at and saying, why can't I have that? It's an incredible opportunity to elevate that conversation up and say, there's so much market opportunity here for all of us. I think one of you folks told me that the market penetration for EOR is like 1% overall. It's so small, right? There's such a huge opportunity to have 10 players in this market, to have 10 multipliers who are absolutely crushing it. And for you to build a really strong, differentiated brand that's built on that trust component, to say, hey, this is a brand that I'm really proud to work with. This is a brand who is motivated by their values and who makes decisions based on their values. This is a brand that really understands me, the buyer, really speaks my language, and really makes sure that, we are building something great together rather than chasing somebody down the street.
Yeah. And that's very, very interesting for me, because when I joined this organization, Sarah, I remember talking to Sagar, and I attended one of the town halls where they talk about trust, transparency, and thoroughness being our cultural tenets. And now being in the business, especially in the category like EOR or global payroll, trust is not something that is an afterthought. It has to be the most fundamental thing that you do your business in this space, especially because you are dealing with, as an employer of record, you're dealing with livelihoods of the people, their compensation, they are in, suppose there is a person whose family is hospitalized and they're looking for an insurance and he's not getting an insurance in time. You are responsible for that. And it's a very sensitive thing. And if you are not defaulting on trust in this area, then you should not be in the business. This is a business which is so sensitive because you are dealing every day with multiple instances of people coming back to you and asking questions about how their salaries are credited, how is their insurance is not getting compensated. So if you are just, your ethics are compromised right at the top, you will not be able to really cater to the people who are dependent on you in making sure that this happens. So you are not doing the business in which you are in a way that it should be done. So I certainly feel that this trust thing that you bring in is not only the cornerstone, it is the basic fundamental on which this space rests on. So,
yeah, I mean, think about the lack of trust or the loss of trust that happens if, you set the wrong payroll deductions or, the paycheck is wrong in the employee's bank account. I mean, immediately someone has questions, right? It's something that very much impacts like their, that hierarchy of needs is something really fundamental. Like, can I feed my family? Can I provide, food and shelter and clothing and, all those things that are really like at the base of what we consider to be the most important things in our lives,
Yes.
right? And one mistake there makes, a really challenging situation or a really challenging like employer-employee relationship. It really breaks the trust between those two folks. And, as somebody who is, in that business of being the employer of record for, many folks around the world, you have this tremendous responsibility to
Absolutely.
make sure that that trust remains intact.
Yeah. And that is why I think the brands who are going to not only use that as a business purpose, but as a purpose of existence and existence in the in their existence of their self in the corporate world. This is going to be the most important element that they have to consider. Now, something that I wanted to ask you as well, when you are building an organization, especially a global marketing organization, how are you considering building a purpose-led global marketing organization? And what are the most important ingredients for building that organization which is purpose-driven? And how does that come into existence once you what is the thought process around that, and then how do you structure that?
Yeah, I think about it maybe on two fronts. One is our values. And sometimes that's, what are our company values? Or sometimes what are the values of the marketing team in particular, probably as a derivative of your company values. And then the other is the strategy, because some people connect more with, values and the way that we do the work. And that's really important. But you also want to know, where are we going? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Like what are we aiming at? What's our North Star? I think for us as a purpose-driven marketing organization, you want to get really crisp on, where are we headed and how are we going to treat each other as we go there, right? So for me, thinking about purpose-driven marketing organizations, a couple of things often, rise to the top. Things like inclusive marketing is really critical to all of us as we, globalize. We think about building a global brand that, speaks to a wider audience around the world. We want to make sure that we're getting, localization right. We want to make sure that, our website is accessible. We want to make sure that, our brand is inclusive, that the way that we talk and the visual identity that we use is going to be something that everyone can enjoy. We don't want to pick a color palette that's not going to work for folks who are colorblind, right?
Yeah.
It just as much as, we don't want to use like all caps text everywhere because it's much harder to read and to parse. Just like we want to make sure that our website is built with the right tags behind the scenes, not just so that folks who are accessing it with a screen reader can understand the flow of the content, but also so that the search engine can understand the flow of the content and ultimately help us to rank, right? Inclusive marketing is good marketing. It's smart marketing, right? And oftentimes, putting an emphasis on that work through the lens of inclusion, it becomes part of that purpose-driven conversation rather than, just something that's like a checkbox that we have to do. Oh, we need to do technical SEO work to the website, right? No, we need to make sure that we're living our value of, being an inclusive marketing organization, not just in the way that we treat our colleagues, but also in the way that we represent ourselves to the market. So I think if you get, that values piece correct, and you help not just your marketing team, but the whole company understand where do we want to be in 3 years and what are the steps that we need to take to get there, you'll really have like all of the foundational elements for a great purpose-driven marketing organization to succeed.
And how much of internal communication is important than external communication while you're doing all this?
I think you have to be really great at marketing your own marketing. And I think that can be hard sometimes when, you grew up in an environment maybe where talking about yourself or talking about your own achievements wasn't necessarily common, right? But I think for both of us probably, that your success is built not just on what the market thinks of your brand, but also what your internal stakeholders think of your brand and what your customers think of your brand and think of that trust that you're building. Because ultimately, all of that communication that you do points back to that soul of your brand and that trust that you're building with those groups.
Absolutely. Now, the most difficult thing to create a global marketing organization is hiring.
For sure.
And more than anything, more than finding a right talent, right right capability, right skill set, and right attitude is to first identify where are you going to hire. Because Sarah, that earlier organizations were used to become big locally first and then go global.
Yep.
Nowadays, you are global from day one. You will be sitting in New York and your first customer can be in India. So what are the biggest hiring challenges in this case, and what have you experienced is the best way to look at hiring in this while you're creating global marketing organization?
I think shifting the mindset away from, having a hub to that borderless talent pool model is really critical, and making sure that your whole organization understands the benefits of doing that. And you can frame that through, localizing your marketing. You can frame that through, hey, we want to hire a specific type of marketer, and there's great talent available in, this place around the world, rather than, great talent maybe available in a different part of marketing that is based someplace else. Maybe you're framing that conversation through your desire to like globally expand the company and to create, not just one HQ, but, maybe centers of excellence around the world, right? Or to pair up team members. If I have product marketers in, London and product folks in London, that's a great pairing. But if I have product folks in India and product marketers in London, well, they're going to miss each other time zone wise most of the day. So I think you can frame that conversation a lot of different ways, but I think it's really critical to get the organization on board, get your leadership team on board, and especially get your people team on board. Because, I work for a firm called Lighthouse Research. We do a lot of surveying of the market and understanding what people's challenges are when they go global. And one of the things we found is that like 7 out of 10 employers say that they don't really have a good understanding of foreign compliance or labor laws in different countries, even as more and more of them are starting to go global in their talent strategy. And that means that it's really critical that you partner with your people team, because I'm a CMO, I'm not a labor relations expert, I'm not an employment law expert, right? I want to partner with my people team to find someone in my organization who can help me navigate that, and they can probably make some great recommendations for partners like the Multiplier team, who can come in and say, hey, it's not just that your CMO isn't necessarily going to be an expert on the labor law in, what are the differences between India and the Philippines, or, London and, Berlin, but also, your people team can get that extra support that they need to make sure that everything is on the up and up as you sort of like expand globally. And so that, if you're maybe one of those 7 out of 10 folks who are worrying about that, that you have somebody that you can turn to and say, hey, what does the time off policy look like in this country? Or, hey, what does the payroll tax requirement look like? What is insurance? What does benefits look like in these different places? There's so much complexity in the world of work, and that shouldn't stop you from embracing that, borderless talent pool mindset.
Absolutely. But how was your calendar looking like when you formed this team?
Well, I get up really early and sometimes I stay up really late. But I think that, you probably find this too, working in different time zones from your team. If you can be the person who, takes maybe some time away as a senior leader from, your early morning routine or your late night routine to connect with someone during the middle part of their day, it goes a long way to building, that trust and that respect, asking your organization all the time to flex when you're not willing to flex yourself.
True.
It's not fair. So you have, an interesting, exciting calendar, and you talk about brand and you talk about messaging at different times of the day, maybe than, you initially expected when you joined the workforce. But, that's why we invented coffee, at least in my opinion.
I agree. So just on that topic, Sarah, there are going to be times when you are just building the organization, and then there are going to be times when you are inheriting a large organization. And when you are building an organization, you are part of a smaller company. Difficulties are different because you don't have a brand in the market. People are not ready to join you. Similarly, when you have a larger organization, you are looking for, the volumes are very high in terms of hiring that you are going to do. And the expectation of talent is going to be very different.
Yep.
Because smallish organization, you need hustlers. Larger organization, you need professionals. But what is your take on that? I mean, what is your take on, and what would be your advice when you are you're giving to a organization which is a smaller organization and looking for people to hire globally, and a larger enterprise organization? Does the hiring decision making and your thought process and the kind of talent that you're looking for change in both the cases, or it's you think that you just have to get the right talent for the right job that you have to do?
I think my advice would maybe be the same. It's just how you apply it might be different. I think my advice would be get crystal clear on what you need to be good at. We want to build a beautiful, diverse, high-performing team, but the reality is, different companies at different stages, they have different priority areas, right? Or they need different skill sets to be successful. So I think get crystal clear on what you need to be great at. Do you really need to be great at brand building? Do you really need to be great at demand and performance marketing? Do you really need to be great at storytelling and product marketing and messaging? You need all of those functions in a marketing organization to be successful, right? You know this. It's like a puzzle that you have to put together. But you also need to know, like, if you had to stack rank them, which one's the most important to my company's success, now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what's going to get me to where I want to go? And similarly, I think when you think about like maybe the style of talent or the style of marketer that you want to hire, a lot of folks sort of categorize marketers in 3 areas. One is like, I build 0 to 1. I build the first of everything, right? The next one is maybe the scaler. Like, I like to take something that worked once and figure out how we do it 100 times, faster, more efficiently at scale, or break it if it's not gonna scale, right? And then the last one's maybe the like optimizer or the efficiency person. Like, I like doing something 1% better every single time. I do it 100 times, but if I can do it 1% better every time, I get this huge return, right? And I think that for companies at different stages of their life cycle, getting clear on, which one of those profiles you need in your different marketing functions is really critical. Because, if you are, for example, writing your first brand book, or, thinking about a rebrand, you maybe need a 0 to 1 type person, regardless of the size of your company.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you have a big demand program and a big demand budget and you're running all these global campaigns, maybe you need more of an optimizer. And hey, maybe if you're someplace in the middle and everything seems like a mess, you need like a combination of those folks who can do, some people are going to be doing 0 to 1. Some people are going to be doing 1 to 100. Some people are just more of that optimization sort of mindset. So I think it really comes back to you as a leader, and it really requires you to get close on, your talent and your sort of like talent map for the organization, because you got to work really closely with your hiring team and your people team and even the folks who are on your interview panels to really assess and really get deep in that nitty gritty of, do you really like building, 0 to 1? Or do you really actually prefer if somebody did the 0 to 1 and now you pick that ball up and run it down the field? Because, it's not as easy as assessing like, okay, are you a product marketer, a brand marketer, a demand marketer, whatever, right? It's not as simple as just looking on a resume and saying like, oh, okay, you've done, this much messaging in your background, you've led teams of this size, right? It's not necessarily as easy to parse or scan for. You got to get into deep questions and figure out, in that interview process, like, what is the profile of this person and are they really the right fit for what I need to be great at right now?
Wow, that was really interesting. And there are 2 or 3 things that I pick up from there. One is that categorization that you talked about, optimizers, a very interesting categorization. And the second thing that I really like about the fact that you you might need 0 to 1 people even in a larger organization. because you are-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about how many things are new in marketing,
Oh,
even just in the last year, right?
Yes.
There's things that we do every day that didn't exist a year ago.
Yeah.
Probably didn't even exist 3 months ago, right?
Yeah.
You need 0 to 1 people at any stage of growth in an organization because you're always going to be thrown those new things that you have to figure out, right?
Absolutely. And that is why one of the things that when I joined Multiplier, there were things that we were talking about that, when you are a smaller organization and you are building global teams, why is it important not to get stuck in creating legal entities and focus on creating your own legal entity in every geography, because you don't know whether the talent in particular geography, the cost benefit analysis of that might just get completely crazy in next 1.5 years. You might not need the talent that you are getting in that geography because that might not be relevant for you anymore.
Yeah.
So I just feel that over a period of time, it's going to get even more important. The way the skills are going to be fungible and they are going to be needed. The skills that are going to be needed for marketing will change dynamically, even more frequently that it used to earlier. So very, very interesting take on that. The last point on that brand piece. How do you, first of all, create an authentic brand, and then how do you stay authentic over a longer period of time? How do you do that?
I think it's knowing your customer.
Yeah.
Show me you know me, right? Is a principle that we all probably employ when we think about, communicating with our customers or building a brand that's going to resonate with our customers. Because, anybody who can fire up ChatGPT these days can build some kind of brand guidelines that say that, they're a blue B2B SaaS vendor with whatever, tone and visual
Blue
guidelines.
B2B SaaS vendor.
Blue B2B. So they're always blue.
90% of them are.
They're always blue. Luckily, neither one of us.
Neither one of us are.
But I think that, thinking about how do you really connect with your customer is what makes you authentic. And also thinking about how you stand out from that sea of, blue B2B SaaS vendors, it makes you authentic, right? Because it's a representation of what your brand values stand for. It's a representation of what your customers value or what they want to stand for. It's a representation of, how they view themselves and how your company views itself. And I think that that is really important because in a world where, anybody can write a set of brand guidelines, that authenticity and that differentiation, putting those two things together is going to be the thing that totally makes you stand out from the crowd as we move forward. It's no longer going to be, how deep is my brand book or, how many guidelines do I have? It's going to be all the intangible human things like soul, like, crispness, like understanding your customer, like, delivering trust and authenticity that are really going to help you rise above, all of the other sort of players in the market.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, because this is a very interesting take, and I have also, it's a very, very unique conundrum that you find yourself in, especially marketers and especially CMOs in this change that is happening and the dynamic environment that we live in. How do you, first of all, create an authentic brand and then stay authentic? When I ask myself that question, I feel that there has to be, one is that there has to be consistency in terms of how you are communicating yourself, not through marketing material only, through your customer-facing functions, through your employees, through anything that you do. Is there a consistent pattern or a consistent communication on your core principles that is getting communicated? And secondly, the authenticity comes from the fact of belief. Do you really believe in what you're doing? So these are the two things that I really feel that are fundamental to create an authentic brand. And that is what I just feel, Sarah, that more and more people are just moving away from these fundamental things when they focus more on market capture and growth rather than on building something that is going to be sustainable over longer period of time. I have seen organizations, even if you take the biggest organizations right now, whether it's Google, whether Microsoft, they have been into existence for the last 20, 25 years. If you see larger organizations who have stood the test of time, like even though they are considered dinosaur here, like IBM's or HP, but they have stayed relevant for almost 7,500 years. So if you are creating a compelling brand, are you thinking of that time horizon, or you are thinking of something in this dynamic world, which is like so much of change?
Yeah.
How do you create an authentic brand? So this is a conundrum that every CMO finds himself, is that are you creating a brand which is going to be short-lived, or you are leaving a legacy which is going to be there even after you have left?
Yeah, I think it's too about the idea of brand as like a framework for delivering that consistency or enabling that consistency, rather than just a set of talking points about
Yes.
whatever is hot in the market right now.
Yeah.
If you truly have a soul and you have a framework for how you think and how you respond and how you communicate, then it doesn't matter like what gets thrown at you. You know how to respond, and that's what gives you that longevity that, somebody takes a brand, for 75 or 100 or 7,500 years, right? It's something that is really going to help you stand the test of time, rather than, hinging your brand just on whatever is the shiniest thing at the moment. That doesn't necessarily help you when the shiny thing changes, or when, everything gets thrown at you in a different way, next year or in 2 years or in 5 years or 75 or 100 years, right?
Yeah.
I think, that is something that, brand builders really, they think of this not as like a single artifact, but they really do think of it as a framework in the best case that's going to help us, navigate whatever life throws at us.
Absolutely. So this was a great conversation, Sarah. I really enjoyed it, and I think we can go on for like
75 or 100 years.
75 or 100 years. But this was great, and thank you very much for coming in. I had a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.